Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, a new pope is elected. Cardinal Robert Prevost is the new leader of the Catholic Church, taking the name Pope Leo XIV. He's the first American ever to hold the title. President Trump extends his congratulations, calling the news a great honor for the U.S. And the president unveils a trade agreement with Britain, saying this will be the first of many. Iris Tao tells us what's in the framework and how it's expected to impact American farmers. Chinese regime leader Xi Jinping is visiting Moscow to strengthen ties with the Kremlin. Arian Pozdar has what President Trump says about possibly involving Beijing in negotiations to end the Russia-Ukraine war. Some residents in the Gaza Strip say they're running out of food. Israel now says they're exploring ways to get aid to the people of Gaza, but not to Hamas. Jason Perry reports. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy announces a plan to roll out a brand new air traffic control system. Arlene Richards tells us what Trump has to say about the project and how much it could cost.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. The first American-born pope in history was announced today. Cardinal Robert Prevost was elected as pope on the second day of the conclave, becoming the spiritual leader of approximately 1.4 billion Catholics worldwide.
Crowds rejoiced as the bells of St. Peter's Basilica tolled today after white smoke emerged from the chimney of the Sistine Chapel. The Cardinals have elected the 267th Pope to lead the Catholic Church.
Habemus Papam.
American Cardinal Robert Prevost, a protege of the late Pope Francis, has taken the name Pope Leo XIV. In his first public remarks, the new Pope said,
"And to all those people, wherever they are, all peoples throughout the world, peace be with you."
Prevost was born in Chicago and studied mathematics at Villanova University before becoming ordained as a priest in 1982. Prior to being elected as Pope, he served as leader of the Vatican Office for Bishop Appointments. It's one of the most important jobs in the Catholic Church. The 69-year-old pontiff also has extensive experience in Peru, first as a missionary and then as an archbishop. He's a member of the Augustinian religious order, which he also led for more than a decade as their prior general. President Trump congratulated the newly elected pope on Truth Social, calling the news a great honor for our country. The State Department also reacted to the news.
This is a moment of profound significance for the Catholic Church, offering renewed hope and continuity amid the 2025 Jubilee year to over 1 billion faithful worldwide. The United States looks forward to deepening our enduring relationship with the Holy See with the first American pontiff. That is again from Secretary of State Marco Rubio.
Pope Leo is the first pope from the United States in the 2,000-year history of the Catholic Church.
President Trump announces his first post-tariff trade deal with the UK. He's also planning to negotiate a deal with the European Union and is open to reducing his 145% tariffs on China as talks are happening this weekend. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more.
There could be no more perfect morning to reach this historic agreement.
On the 80th anniversary of Victory Day for World War II, President Trump unveiling a new trade agreement with the UK, the first of its kind since President Trump announced a global tariff plan back in early April. This new agreement, Trump says, will bring in billions of dollars and increase market access for American exports.
Especially in agriculture, dramatically increasing access for American beef, ethanol.
The larger goal, Trump and the UK Prime Minister say, is to boost fairness and protect jobs in both countries.
It's going to not only protect jobs, but create jobs, opening market.
Specifically, the agreement will leave in place a 10% baseline tariff that Trump imposed on Britain. But the U.S. would cut its auto tariffs from nearly 30% to now 10% for 100,000 British cars, the UK's top export to the U.S. It will also reduce tariffs on UK steel and aluminum down to zero. In return, the UK will open access to American beef, ethanol, and other farm products. While details of the agreement remain to be ironed out in the coming weeks, and that the deal serves more like a framework or like a springboard, like the UK calls it, for future cooperation, and the Trump administration officials emphasize that Trump played a major role in closing this deal.
He gets things done in a matter of time. This would have taken Jameson and I 3 years, maybe. And instead, we got it done in 45 days, certainly because we work for Donald Trump.
On other countries, the president walked out of the West Wing in the afternoon and told us that the U.S. is working on 3 other trade agreements.
We're doing 3. We'll be doing a lot of the signings.
And White House trade advisor Peter Navarro told the NTD that the trade team is moving at Trump speed. Which countries might be next?
Every single day, we've got representatives from different countries coming in. I just want to assure the American people that we are moving in Trump time, which is to say as quickly as possible.
President Trump says the U.S. is working on a deal with the EU and that he's open to cutting his 145% tariffs on China, depending on how talks go this weekend between Secretary of Treasury Scott Bessent and his Chinese counterparts. Trump further says that he wants China to open up and let American businesses in.
But that'll be the greatest thing that ever happened to China. The people will be happier. They'll buy for less. They'll see things that they never saw before, and they'll be buying them. And it'll really create great long-term peace.
But Trump also suggests that the U.S. would have been better off if it didn't do business with China in the first place, adding that it's a good thing that for now, imports from China are down. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
And lawmakers on Capitol Hill are reacting to news of the trade deal. Republicans celebrate while Democrats question the impact of Trump's tariff policies. Our Washington correspondent Luis Eduardo Martinez has more on the story.
It's great. I mean, he's the guy to negotiate these deals. He's doing a successful job, and everybody seems to want to come to the table and do a deal with the United States, and that's great for America.
Trump is working. What he's saying is working, and he's correct, and he's bringing these people to the table. And the reason he's doing it and Congress isn't because Congress doesn't have the guts, because we're compromised, and we will never do the right thing, and he knows it.
As Republicans celebrated the announcement of President Trump's first trade deal since Liberation Day, Democrats remained apprehensive of its potential impact and remained critical of the president's tariff policies.
I mean, I got to see the details, but obviously the tariffs are much more bigger than just one country, and the impact that it has on the markets and the economy is devastating. So
the reality is that his trade policy and the tariff policy is already destroying our economy, and trade is down at our ports by 35%. And so that's already a really big problem. And so there's just no question that the trade policy is horrific for the country.
House Freedom Caucus Chairman Congressman Andy Harris believes that the president's tariff policies can unite the House Republican Conference behind the reconciliation process outlined by the Republican leaders.
Do you think that trade deals with other countries will unlock strategies for the Republican conference regarding reconciliation bill?
No, absolutely. What they'll prove is that the president is absolutely right. I mean, what he's done with tariffs is exactly what needed to be done. This is the first of many trade deals. He's going to make America great again by bringing industry back to the United States. Excuse me, I've got to vote.
Yeah. Thank you, Congressman.
And on reconciliation, what is your view? What do you think is the largest impasse for the House Republican Conference to get a deal done?
Well, I mean, it's going to be a challenge because we have a lot of different varying opinions. My biggest concern is that we need to make sure we deliver on Trump's agenda.
The main concern is finding the savings, because if we don't find the right amount of savings, we can't have the tax cuts at the level we need. We're going to extend the tax cuts. That's a $4.5 trillion tax cut. In order to find that, we have to find $2 trillion plus the $2.5 trillion in economic growth.
House Democrats continue to accuse Republicans of targeting Medicaid benefits to reach their $1.5 trillion spending cut target.
there's no way that they're going to be able to extend this huge tax cut to the very rich without hurting Medicaid. And many other constituencies are Medicaid recipients. So they're going to have to go back home and explain it to their constituents.
Republican lawmakers insist that they will not target benefits, but instead will target waste, fraud, and abuse within Medicaid. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
President Trump suggests he might get China involved in convincing Russia to end the war. China's Communist leader Xi Jinping is among the heads of state visiting Moscow today, strengthening ties with the Kremlin. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pozdar has the latest.
Chinese leader Xi Jinping on Thursday, joining Russian President Vladimir Putin at a banquet hall in Moscow. Socialist leaders from Venezuela and Cuba are in Russia as well, but Putin called Xi the main guest during this week's visits. Russia is celebrating the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. Putin and Xi signed a joint statement agreeing to strengthen economic ties. The two countries seek to boost trade and investment by 2030. Putin previously requested a 3-day ceasefire for this week's visits. But a Ukrainian soldier on Thursday says the fighting continues as normal.
There have already been 3 strikes in the 7 hours and 46 minutes of the ceasefire, so the facts speak for themselves.
Meanwhile, in the US, President Trump was asked about China's involvement in the peace process.
Will you be asking China to help you close, the gap between Ukraine and Russia?
I think so, yeah. I think it's a natural thing to ask.
This comes as the US is also in talks with China for a possible trade deal. Both countries recently imposed high tariffs on each other.
What do you expect?
Sure. I don't know. I think we're making good progress. Fighting is a little bit different than it was. I think if we weren't involved, Russia would be, going at it to maybe get the whole thing.
Also on Thursday, Ukraine's parliament ratifies a minerals deal with the US.
We appreciate that, but the deal is all now signed up and ratified. And we have access to a massive amount of very, very high-quality rare earth.
Ukraine's first deputy prime minister says this document is not merely a legal construct, it is the foundation of a new model of interaction with a key strategic partner. The State Department was asked about Russian attacks on Ukraine's mines and how the US will respond now that it is involved in Ukraine's minerals.
Remember, this is not at all related to the negotiations regarding the ceasefire and the conflict. This is a separate dynamic that is an arrangement of an economic partnership.
The spokesperson also pointed out that the more than 330 Ukrainian lawmakers unanimously voted in favor of ratifying the deal. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
In the Middle East, some residents in the Gaza Strip say they're almost out of food as Israel has been blocking aid to the territory for more than 2 months. Israeli officials now say they're exploring ways to get aid into Gaza without it getting into the hands of Hamas. NTD's Jason Perry has the story.
Residents in the Gaza Strip gathered around a soup kitchen to get food in Khan Yunis on Thursday. And according to the kitchen supervisor, that could be the last day they serve food to residents because they're running out.
As you can see, the food is not enough and food supplies are about to finish. I ask God to ease the situation and for crossings to open to save people, feed the hungry tummies and heal the broken hearts in Gaza Strip.
And the day before, the World Central Kitchen posted on X that they no longer have the supplies to cook meals or bake bread in the Gaza Strip. This comes as Israel has been blocking aid to the territory for more than 2 months now, saying that Hamas steals the aid and uses it to support its terrorist activity. On Thursday, Israeli government spokesman David Mincer said humanitarian aid was sent to the Gaza Strip 2 weeks ago.
Hamas hijack humanitarian aid that was sent in a couple of weeks ago. So now it's in Hamas's hands. They could release it to their people. So our battle is with Hamas, not with ordinary Gazans. It is a tragedy when ordinary Gazans suffer because of Hamas.
But he did say Israel is currently exploring ways that aid can be delivered to residents in Gaza and not to Hamas. President Trump also recently commented on the humanitarian aid situation in the Gaza Strip.
We're going to help the people of Gaza get some food. People are starving, and we're going to help them get some food. Hamas is making it impossible because they're taking everything that's brought in, but we're going to help the people of Gaza.
Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gave an update on the hostages still held in the Gaza Strip.
We know for sure that there are 21 live hostages. There is no debate about that. There are 3 more who, unfortunately, there is doubt whether they are alive. Therefore, the certain thing we say is 21.
Israel also reported that one less abductor is alive. As seen in this video released on Thursday, Israeli former hostage Yafa Adar sat in the back seat next to this Hamas terrorist who helped kidnap her on October 7th. On Thursday, Israel reported killing him in an airstrike in the area of Gaza City. Israeli forces also reported launching strikes against Hezbollah terrorist infrastructure in southern Lebanon, including weapons and tunnel entrances. The Lebanese health ministry said at least one person was killed and 8 were wounded. Jason Perry, NTD News.
In the wake of recent deadly air crashes, Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy today announced a plan to overhaul what he called an outdated air traffic control system. President Trump joined briefly by telephone. NTD's Arlene Richards has the highlights.
The Trump administration on Thursday promising families of recent air crash victims that they're going to fix an outdated system. President Trump took the lead by telephone.
A complete modernization is going to soon be taking place. We're going to be going all brand new, all with the best company. We're negotiating with the various companies now. That's why we'd like your recommendation. We're beginning the process of fully replacing the technology at more than 4,600 air traffic control sites. That's a lot. And building 6 new state-of-the-art air traffic control coordination centers, which is the top. That's the tippy top of what you do. And it's the first time that there's been anything like this since the 1960s. We have a lot of equipment that's from the 1960s, if you can believe it, and it doesn't even mesh with the plane. So we'll be purchasing 25,000 new radios and replacing hundreds of old radars. The radar systems are old and broken. And we'll install 4,000 new high-speed network connections using fiber optic cables, satellites, and wireless technologies. And we'll also install 174 new weather stations in Alaska. Alaska's prime time. So these actions will bring American air traffic control into the highest level of anybody, any country, anywhere in the world, the highest in the 21st century.
Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy said the plan calls for 6 new air traffic control centers, along with technology and communications upgrades. New hardware and software would be standardized across all air traffic facilities. He showed attendees an example of current systems.
Now, if you might take a look at the stage here, we have a number of different, you might call them systems. I didn't, by the way, get this off the set of Apollo 13 or War Games. Remember those movies? You might think that I went to the Smithsonian and pulled them out of the Smithsonian to show you what they used to use for air traffic control. I didn't do any of that. This is actually the systems that our air traffic controllers use to keep our skies safe. It is old. It looks like it's out of the 70s and 80s.
The House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee estimated last week that it might cost $12.5 billion to overhaul the entire system. Duffy said he can't make this happen alone. He called on Congress to step up and help.
So to do it in 3 or 4 years, we need all of the money up front. Right? One of the problems of the past is when you give small tranches of money year over year, politics change, leadership changes, presidents change, interest changes, and it never gets built. So I'm going to ask the Congress for upfront appropriations to give us all the money. I'll come before the Congress every quarter and give them an update of how far we've built, how much money we've spent. They can pressure test what's been done to do the oversight to make sure we're doing this correctly. But on top of that, we also need permitting reform, some form of clearing the deck so we don't have to deal with all of the regulation around permitting so we can actually build this quickly. If we go through the permitting process and don't get the money, this is going to be the same old thing.
The weaknesses within the air traffic control system have been highlighted for years in hearings before Congress and government reports. Other speakers included political leaders, union representatives, industry leaders, and airline CEOs. Family members of victims in the D.C. air crash also attended. Texas Senator Ted Cruz, a strong supporter of aviation, said the family's tragedies would not be in vain.
Today's announcement, I believe, is a major step in reversing the deterioration of safety in the U.S. airspace. As chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee, I will work to give the Department of Transportation the resources needed to improve today's infrastructure, to improve the technology you see in front of us, much of which seems like it was assembled at a Radio Shack 50 years ago. But all of us know that money alone isn't a cure for all that ails the FAA. We need to ensure that there is a committed long-term focus to fixing and to upgrading technology, to streamlining and simplifying procurement, to bolstering the workforce, and to making it easier and safer to bring new tech, whether delivery drones or air taxis, into the U.S. airspace system.
Arlene Richards, NTD News.
Coming up, human rights may come up during U.S.-China trade negotiations. President Trump says the trial of former Hong Kong newspaper owner Jimmy Lai could be on the agenda in talks with the CCP. Jack Bradley reports. And at a hearing on Capitol Hill, the nation's cyber and infrastructure security director outlines the threats the U.S. faces from China's cyber attacks. Jason Blair has the highlights for us after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. President Trump says freeing former Hong Kong newspaper owner Jimmy Lai will come up during trade negotiations with China this weekend. Lai was arrested in 2020 and imprisoned under Hong Kong's national security law, which cracks down on political dissent. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the details.
I think we're going to have a good weekend with China. I think they have a lot to gain.
President Trump says the U.S. plans to bring up the trial of Jimmy Lai during trade negotiations with China. This is a signal that China's human rights abuses may be a topic during the talks. Jimmy Lai was a Hong Kong-based tycoon and founder of the now-defunct Apple Daily, a top news outlet in Hong Kong that was critical of the Chinese Communist Party. In a radio interview with Hugh Hewitt on Wednesday, the president said that he'll bring up the case.
Last time I talked to you, you were the president-elect, and you told me you were going to try and get Jimmy Lai out. Secretary Rubio has told me he's going to try and get Jimmy Lai out.
Talking about Jimmy Lai is a very good idea. We'll put it down, or we'll put it down as part of the negotiation.
Lai was arrested after China imposed a national security law on Hong Kong, a law that cracks down on political dissent. Lai's newspaper, Apple Daily, was forced to close after a police raid and asset freeze in 2021. Several countries, such as the U.S. and U.K., have called this political persecution. This comes as Trump's pick for ambassador to China, David Perdue, was sworn in on Wednesday.
We're swearing in our next ambassador to the People's Republic of China. What timing, David? What timing?
Considering China's human rights abuses, Perdue said during his Senate confirmation hearing last month that the Chinese Communist Party won't change.
You think she's going to change?
I don't think he's going to change. The question is, what is his objective and what is he going to be capable of doing?
Jimmy Lai is unjustly on trial and in jail because of the Communist Party in China. As an ambassador to China, what do you think you can do to put pressure on the regime to release this hero of democracy and human rights?
What we have to do is stand up for human rights in a way that is a little bit different. You know, China has now become very aggressive. After Hong Kong, you know, all bets are off.
And on the leverage the U.S. has over China's economy.
We stop buying their product, what will happen?
Well,
if the American public says enough's enough, what will happen to their economy?
It'll collapse.
Right.
As talks are set this weekend between Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Trade Ambassador Jamieson Greer and Chinese officials in Switzerland, President Trump seems optimistic that these talks will be productive.
I do think they have far more to gain than we do, in a sense.
Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
How serious are China's cyber attacks to American infrastructure? The acting director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency took questions from lawmakers to assess and address the issue. NTD correspondent Jason Blair reports.
China is the most prolific, dominant threat we have. And they are doing it for 3 reasons.
The acting administrator for the Cyber and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, says the primary reasons for the Chinese Communist Party cyber attacks are for espionage, stealing intellectual property, and to get into critical U.S. infrastructure.
And they are waiting. They are patient. They're persistent. They have decades of experience.
The CCP is actively exploiting gaps in infrastructure to sow that chaos and instability, embedding within our critical systems and positioning to strike when it suits them, as we know.
Bridget Bean says critical infrastructure is the backbone of U.S. national and economic security.
We need to make it harder for them. We need to make sure that we are leveraging every partnership we have, that we're making sure that people understand the threat, that everybody is doing what they need to do.
Salt Typhoon and Volt Typhoon are two recent large-scale cyber attacks taken against critical American infrastructure by CCP state-sponsored actors. How to respond to these attacks has been the subject of many recent hearings on Capitol Hill. Federal legislation like the Strengthening Cyber Resilience Against State-Sponsored Threats Act has been making its way through Congress.
So we want to make sure at CISA that we are working with the critical infrastructure in our country, whether it's the electrical grid, whether it's clean drinking water, whether it's our healthcare, right? So it's our communications.
States have also taken steps to protect themselves against cyber attacks. Texas Governor Greg Abbott issued an executive order last fall to combat these cyber attacks from the CCP, especially in regards to the state's electrical grid. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
Coming up, the British Prime Minister hailing the new US-UK trade deal as historic, saying it will save businesses and thousands of jobs in the UK. Malcolm Hudson reports. And what's the significance of that trade deal, what President Trump is calling the first of many, and how might it change the future of trade between the US and the UK? Andrew Hale from the Heritage Foundation joins us to discuss when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Britain hailed the US-UK trade deal as historic and said it will save thousands of jobs in the car and steel industry in the UK. The import taxes had threatened to cripple Britain's high-end car makers. The timing of the announcement coincides with Victory in Europe Day, marking the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War in Europe. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson has more for us from London.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said the new US-UK trade deal takes the relationship between the two nations into new territory.
Thank you, Mr. President Donald, and this is a really fantastic, historic day in which we can announce this deal between our two great countries.
Highlighting the importance, he said wartime leader Winston Churchill declared victory in Europe against the Nazis exactly 80 years ago.
Almost at the same hour, and as we were 80 years ago, with the UK and the US standing side by side, I think is incredibly important and makes this truly historic.
The British government said the deal will reduce tariffs on British car exports into the US from 27.5% to just 10%. British car makers will be given a quota of 100,000 cars per year at this lower rate, which is almost the total Britain exported to the US last year.
And we've got scope now to increase that quota as we go forward, so this is not fixed.
Tariffs on British steel and aluminium exports to the US will also be reduced from 25% down to zero. Starmer said this will save businesses and thousands of jobs in the UK. Exports of plane parts, such as Rolls-Royce jet engines, will also enter the US tariff-free, while a UK airline agreed to buy $10 billion worth of Boeing planes. On agriculture, there will be reciprocal access to beef. British farmers get a tariff-free quota for 13,000 metric tons, while the UK will also remove tariffs for US ethanol, which is used to produce beer. The British government said that Britain's digital services tax will not be changed. It's a 2% tax on revenue earned by big tech firms, such as Amazon, Google and Meta, something Trump has been highly critical of. The British government said they will work with the US on a digital trade deal that will strip back paperwork for British firms trying to export to the US. The blanket 10% tariff imposed on all imports to the US still remains in place. Britain has been seeking a trade deal with the US since Brexit, but until now has been unable to achieve it. Douglas Carswell, a former British politician and now head of a free market think tank, said the deal is a tremendous success.
Incredibly difficult for a Republican administration in America and a left-wing government in Britain to find common ground but they've managed it. So well done to both sides. This is going to be really good.
And he said other countries will be looking at this deal as an example of what they could agree with America.
Countries like Japan and Korea and Taiwan and India, and they will see in the British-American trade deal today a model that they can take so that they too can have access to the American market and the Americans can have access to their markets.
The United States and Britain will continue negotiating a broader deal and reducing the remaining reciprocal tariffs, saying the final details are still being written up. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
Joining us now to discuss is Andrew Hale. He's a senior trade policy analyst at the Heritage Foundation. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you here. Now, first, what is the significance of the UK being the first to secure a deal? Many thought it would be India.
I think there's a variety of reasons. Obviously, we have such a historic, close relationship with the United Kingdom. President Trump's mother was British, from the Scottish Outer Hebrides Islands. I think he has a very emotional attachment with the country, as anyone would, having one's parent come from that country, as well as the fact that he has greatly appreciated British traditions, as well as institutions such as the royal family. And like I said, I think he just has a great attachment to the country. That's one thing. He's done business there, and he found it easier to establish businesses there, like the Turnberry Country Club golf course in Scotland, and have found it exasperating dealing with the European Union. And I think that the United Kingdom has played it very well. They have basically come to the table and got a deal, whereas the European Union, sadly today, they're announcing that they're looking at retaliatory tariffs. That's not something we want, because that could escalate into a trade war. So I think that this is something we should be celebrating. And as the British ambassador, Lord Mandelson, said today in the Oval Office, this is a great beginning to something that will lead to hopefully a comprehensive free trade agreement. And of course, I've already been talking to congressmen today in the House and senators in the Senate, and they're talking about the House needs to give President Trump Trade Promotion Authority, TPA, so he can negotiate a comprehensive free trade agreement, which of course would mean that he could even lower tariffs in the harmonized tariff schedule that Congress has jurisdiction over.
Now, expanding on that, according to the White House fact sheet, the baseline reciprocal 10% tariff remains in place. We don't know all the details yet, but what specific areas are you watching for in this deal?
So, for example, the reason there's the 10% is because that's the 10% global tariff they put on all countries. And then there were these liberation tariffs that went above that for countries where there was a concern with regards to trade barriers and or trade deficits. And so the United Kingdom has a trade surplus. They didn't have any tariffs above the 10% because, of course, they have a trade surplus with the United States. So they're dealing with a country that basically has a trade surplus with us. But there are some, underlying issues. I mean, there's things that I think both countries need to look at. So I'll give you one example. Why does the United Kingdom have a 10% tariff on oranges coming into the United Kingdom when the United Kingdom produces no oranges? Those oranges must come to the United Kingdom from either Israel, Spain, or the United States. But the United States also has protected markets as well, such as sugar. If you look at the Fanjul brothers, who have the monopoly of sugar in the United States, they donate to both Democrats and Republicans. And sugar prices are very high here as a result of that lobbying. And that's why we're using high fructose corn syrup as an alternative, which has led to child obesity and obesity in Americans in general. So we have our own protected markets that have also led to some problems at home. So we're looking at all those things. I was very pleased that President Trump talked about British food standards, particularly with regards to some stuff that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is concerned about. And we may actually be going towards their food standards. And those food standards were maintained in today's deal, the British food standards.
Now, back to one of your earlier points, you wrote last October that a U.S.-UK free trade agreement is long overdue. It's win-win for both nations. Give us a sense, what did the U.S.-UK trade situation look like before this deal, and how will a deal like this change that?
Well, obviously, we didn't have the Liberation Day tariffs, which have obviously been disruptive to the markets. Even the administration admits that, but it also draws countries to the negotiating table. And I think that that's now happened. And we need to get our allies on side because, the duties also harm America's global leadership if they're maintained against our allies, and undermines progress establishing resilient supply chains in the region outside of China. And, this is my concern is this trade war has the potential of pushing our allies in the arms of China. So I would actually argue that, as a negotiating tool, it's been very, very effective. Now, one needs to remember that in President Trump's first term, he did offer to Prime Minister Theresa May of the United Kingdom membership of the USMCA, the new NAFTA, because the United Kingdom was trying to get free trade agreements with both Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And Trump said, join this. It's the gold standard free trade agreements. And she turned it down because she wanted closer alignment with the European Union. And I hope that the British government has learned that lesson, especially now, given that President Trump has the European Union and their protected markets in their sights in a trade war, and the European Union is now talking about retaliatory tariffs. It's good the United Kingdom should stay away from the firing line and be closer to us. And I'll finish with this. Given that we're having negotiations with the People's Republic of China this weekend, I think it's very important to send a message to China that the United Kingdom is now aligning itself more closely with the United States and choose the United States over a closer alignment with the People's Republic of China.
On that last point, all eyes are on the high-stakes meeting this weekend. Now, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is saying that it's likely a de-escalation between the U.S. and China, not a trade deal. What are you expecting out of this weekend's meeting?
Well, I think both sides want a constructive relationship. But, China, at the Heritage Foundation, we are a free trade organization. But we don't believe in free trade with foreign adversaries, non-market economies, and autocracies like the People's Republic of China. They have horrific unfair practices, the most obvious being Uyghur forced labor, the horrific human rights record with regards to Falun Gong and Christians and other groups in China. The fact that if you register a company in China, you employ more than 3 Communist Party members, then you must have a Communist Party cell. And given that there are 126 members of the Communist Party, most medium-sized, large-sized companies would have such a cell. And I consider that a national security threat to the United States. And I think it's something that we should all be deeply concerned about. It's not a free market. We never should have let them into the WTO. And I hope that our efforts in addressing trade imbalances and trade unfair practices and just decent humanity in general be directed towards China. And I'm hoping that we can get our allies to embrace the same tariffs and the same approach to China that we are, because they're a foreign adversary and there are so many things we're actually helping to facilitate. And I'll finish with this. Many Americans are wearing clothing made with Uyghur forced labor, effectively modern slavery. And that we need to keep that in mind when we make shopping decisions, when we see the label made in China.
And digging into that a bit, if, say, China promises to do more on curbing fentanyl, how likely are we to see the U.S. side lower tariffs? Could that number go down to 50%, as some reports are suggesting?
Listen, I'm mindful that I'm not a part of those negotiations. I do speak to people in the administration, but really it'll be up to those people. I will not be at those meetings outside the United States this weekend. But I'm in Geneva and what have you. So I look forward to hearing the results, as your viewers do as well. I hope that we remain resilient because they are a serious threat to the United States. And it's also difficult to negotiate with a country that believes it's morally correct to lie to your to other countries, that we don't share the same moral value framework. So, we always thought that we'd have open trade with China and that would somehow lead to them liberalizing, and that has not happened. And we've learned our lesson, and we need to address that.
Very different playbooks for sure. Andrew Hale, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on.
Coming up, history will be made again in Los Angeles. Where will the world gather for the 2028 Olympic and Paralympic Games? Christina Corona tells us which venues were confirmed for the ceremonies. A new perspective on America's founding now on display at the Library of Congress in D.C. We'll show you some of the unlikely parallels between George Washington and King George III when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. From Dodger Stadium to Venice Beach, Los Angeles will take center stage in 2028. Officials just revealed where the Olympic and Paralympic ceremonies will take place. NTD's Christina Corona tells us more from Los Angeles.
We're here at the iconic LA Coliseum, where history will be made once again. Mayor Karen Bass and LA28 officials announced that this venue, along with SoFi Stadium in Inglewood, will serve as the official venues for the opening and closing ceremonies of the 2028 Olympic and Paralympic Games.
On the 14th of July, 2028, just 1,162 days from today, who's counting? The Olympic opening ceremonies will be a dual celebration between the LA Memorial Coliseum and the stadium in Inglewood, marking the beginning of the largest Olympics ever held. On July 30th, 2028, the Olympic closing ceremonies will then be held right here at LA Memorial Coliseum.
The Coliseum had previously hosted events for the 1932 and 1984 Olympics in Los Angeles.
This will become the first venue in history to host events for the third Olympic Games. In 2028, the whole world will watch as we make history yet again.
LA28 announced Olympic baseball will be held at Dodger Stadium, beach volleyball in Long Beach, and surfing off the San Clemente coast. Squash makes its Olympic debut at Universal Studios Courthouse Square, famous for Back to the Future.
From the triathlon at Venice Beach to skateboarding in the San Fernando Valley, from boxing downtown to baseball at Dodger Stadium and track and field here at Expo Park, the entire city will be on display.
For the first time in LA, the Paralympics will kick off at SoFi Stadium on August 15, 2028, marking the largest competition in Paralympic history. The closing ceremony returns to the Coliseum on August 27th.
Our Olympic venues highlight the very best of Los Angeles, the Southern California region, and America, which will be on display for the world stage, welcoming 15,000 athletes and millions of fans from around the world.
From Venice Beach to Dodger Stadium and beyond, Los Angeles is preparing to welcome the world in 2028, with the Olympic torch set to be lit in LA once again. Reporting from the city of Los Angeles, Christina Corona, NTD News.
An exhibit drawing parallels between George Washington and King George III is on display at the Library of Congress. The exhibit, titled The Two Georges, offers a brand new perspective on the history of America's founding. NTD's Sam Wong has more.
Two men on opposite sides in the American Revolutionary War meeting face to face for the first time. At the Library of Congress, an exhibit featuring the history of George Washington and King George III is attracting tourists from everywhere. It's the birth of America from a perspective you've never heard before.
People know about George Washington, of course, and King George III, but there's a lot of myths about these two men. They were born just 6 years apart, so they were contemporaries. They met many of the same people, they read many of the same books, and they were both fascinated in science and agriculture, and we tell that story in the exhibition.
Toggling between democracy and monarchy, The Two Georges takes us through the lives of both figures behind closed doors. The exhibit includes historic artifacts from the Windsor Castle and the Library of Congress. History shows it doesn't matter whether you're the King of England or the President of the United States. You could get tangled up in an interesting family dynamic just like the rest of us.
George Washington didn't have any biological children, but he had some stepchildren who he helped raise. And this letter is actually from Jackie's teacher, and he's complaining about George Washington's stepson, saying he's indolent. I think it's interesting because both Georges actually dealt with who they considered rebellious children.
For General Washington, the American Revolutionary War was full of challenges both at home and abroad, from commanding the Continental Army to seeking support from France. But in terms of espionage, our founding father was well ahead of his time.
This is the actual code book that George Washington used during the Revolution to decode letters that were sent to him about the movement of British troops. General Washington there was number 711, 711. So not 007, but 711 was his code word.
The Two Georges will remain on display through March of 2026. Visitors get to check out the collection and celebrate the 250th anniversary of America's independence. Sam Wong, NTD News, Washington, D.C.
And tomorrow, don't miss our special coverage of the annual World Falun Dafa Day Parade. Thousands will come together in New York City to celebrate the anniversary of the public introduction of Falun Dafa, a spiritual discipline for mind and body. It's a celebration of faith, freedom, and the strength of the human spirit in the face of persecution. That's tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern, only on NTD News. And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.